And we are going to go ahead and get started since it's 4 o'clock. Welcome to our second webinar of the week for Field Inclusive Week. Today is all about challenging stereotypes and asking ourselves, what should a field biologist look like? I am Murry Burgess, and I am currently a PhD candidate at North Carolina State University. I am pursuing my degree in fisheries, wildlife, and conservation biology. I am also one of the CEOs and co-founders of Field Inclusive, a new nonprofit working towards amplifying and supporting marginalized and historically excluded biologists who professionally work in the outdoors. Just so you are aware, this webinar will be recorded and recordings will be posted on our YouTube channel, so be sure to follow us there for easy access to the recordings again. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to give a special thanks to our sponsor for Field Inclusive Week, who is the Nature Conservancy. Thank you so much for coming on board as a sponsor beginning in the fall of 2022 and for being dedicated to promoting and supporting a more inclusive outdoors. It's through organizations like yours and the many individuals who donate to our organization that we can continue our mission and goals in raising awareness when it comes to social field safety issues by hosting events like Field Inclusive Week, as well as providing financial support to marginalized and historically excluded individuals who work outdoors. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's discussion. Sue earned her bachelor's degree in history with plans to become a high school teacher. After 3 months teaching in India and a year with a Murry Corps volunteer program, she went back for a bachelor's in nutrition from the University of Maryland College Park. She completed her dietetic internship at Keene State College in New Hampshire. After spending a few years working in Vermont and New Hampshire, she relocated to North Carolina for warm weather. She has been with the NC State's Campus Health for the last 5 years, providing outpatient nutrition counseling to undergraduate and graduate students. Outside of work, you can find her recipe testing, completing jigsaw puzzles, and hiding from the cold. So welcome, Sue. Thank you for being here today to share your time and expertise. And audience, as you listen to the talk, we invite you to write questions in the Q&A section of the webinar. And with that, I will pass it off to you now, Sue.
Thanks so much, Murry. Thanks everyone for having me today. I will say I've had to learn and pick Murray's brain a lot about fieldwork. I am not a grad student, have certainly not done fieldwork personally. So please excuse the gaps in my knowledge and feel free, yes, like Murray said, throw in some questions. I'm happy to make this really a dialogue-based presentation. So let me share my screen. Okay, move myself out of the window. All right. So like Murray had said, the goals today really is about talking about like, what does it mean to be a person out in the field? What does it mean to be in spaces that aren't necessarily where we feel like we might belong, and really feeling like we can take up that space and have ownership of that. But first, and most importantly to my kind of work, is really thinking about how do we really nourish ourselves and feed ourselves in a way that feels really uncomplicated and energizing. So really getting into some basics about nutrition. The goal for our philosophy from a nutrition counseling standpoint is always that we're giving and providing information, not that we're providing, rules or, like meal plans that need to be adhere to 100%, 365. The goal really is like, how does food work for you? Like, and making it really individual and thinking about like energizing needs throughout the day. We'll definitely talk about hydration because it can be so critical, especially if we're doing field work, at altitude or in the heat or in the summertime. And then we'll make that transition from nutrition to talking about how our bodies show up in spaces and how we really take care of them and how history has really taught us some negative thoughts about taking care of our bodies. Okay. So doing some basics for food, we get energy from carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. I won't belabor this too much, and I'll provide the slides to the group to pass to everyone. But the goal really is that we get energy from all three sources. We do technically get calories from alcohol, but that's not part of the slides here. And our most kind of valuable, efficient, looked for and desirable energy source are those carbohydrates. And that's really, I think, where a lot of us have a little bit of fear around oftentimes. So really trying to challenge that today. So carbohydrates can come from grainy sources like breads and pastas and wheats. It can come from vegetables, from fruits, really anything that came from the ground, and then dairy products like milk and yogurt. Proteins, of course, the basis of our amino acid building blocks, really critical in terms of what we think of as like muscle building, but also in terms of tissues and organs as well. So that can be from plants or animal sources. And then fats are that really high energy source, absorption of vitamins. A lot of hormone signaling comes from our fats, temperature regulation. And so we have plant sources and animal sources. And when we think about feeding ourselves, I think we often forget or we lose time and we lose the ability to tune into ourselves. And that's really tuning into kind of our hunger signals. And the idea is, are we rushing through our day and rushing through our life? And so oftentimes we're being reactive to hunger. So, oftentimes we have, students who are like, well, I wake up and I'm rushing out the door to get to class and I'm go, 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 go. And then by the end of the day, I'm famished, I'm starving, and I want to eat everything in sight. So then, eat everything in sight. And then all of a sudden you're just overwhelmingly full. So it's like kind of playing the extremes of hunger and fullness. So oftentimes we're looking at like, okay, like, do you notice hunger signals? That's kind of step one. And then like, do you notice where you're at, throughout the day, before a meal, after a meal? This can be a tricky place. I think a lot of us lose our kind of intuition, our instinct for our hunger signals, because oftentimes, unfortunately, we're taught and trained differently about how to feed our body. So we're working on a schedule, we're working based on, labs. Like we can't control a lot of those things, but oftentimes it can also be that we're trying to, shut down hunger signals in an effort to follow a diet. So this can be a really tricky place. And it's always kind of an evolving thing too, that we want to make sure like, am I feeding myself well? And then also, can I start to kind of tune into my own body? All right, this is my fancy graphic that I'm really proud of. Okay, so when we're thinking about energy, we're thinking about how do I keep you from a physical standpoint? How do I keep you really well nourished and stably nourished for as long as possible from one point in your day to another? Yes, food from an emotional standpoint is equally as important, and that's not to downplay that here, but that's going to be kind of later in the slides. This is really about how does food physically, biologically feed us. So this red line is what we call simple carbohydrates. So that's juice, soda, candy, white bread, white rice, soda, things like that. So those carbohydrates are made up of those short chains of glucose molecules. So when we eat them, they're rushing out into our bloodstream. So that's that high rush on that curvature, and going into our brain and our organs and our muscles. The problem is those foods in isolation by themselves as a meal is also from a rush, also to kind of a sudden and rapid drop. So you get like a huge rush of energy, but it's very short-lived. And so we can go from like feeling like we have all the energy in the world to tackle on life, and then very quickly feeling maybe more hungry, more irritable, losing focus. So it's not great sustainably from one meal to the next per se. This is really great in terms of like activity, like physical activity. If you're looking for something like quick bursts, like I need to get through this class or what have you, this is a really great, easy option. They're typically very portable too. So like this is certainly a place and time for these foods, or in conjunction with other foods. Next, we have our complex carbohydrates. So that's any food containing fiber. So whole grains like oats, barley, brown rice, whole wheat breads, cereal grains, things like that. And then also any fruits and vegetables. Fiber slows down that breakdown of those carbohydrates into our system. So it's a slower rise into our bloodstream, which means it's also a slower rise out. So it's slightly longer lasting. So maybe for about an hour. It's a great snack, like an apple or something like that to throw in your bag. But it's certainly also not going to be a full meal. Then we have our lean proteins. So this is anything from beans and lentils to yogurt to like a white fish or chicken breast or egg whites or something like that, these proteins are going to break down even more slowly through our system. And so we're going to have that nice gentle rise. And then roughly about 2 to 3 hours later, having that drop. If we combine those complex carbohydrates, so something with fiber, the proteins and the fats, we're looking at roughly a 4-hour energy curve of stability. And that's really what we're thinking in terms of our hunger signals ghrelin in keeping us full from one meal to the next. So when we're thinking up from like a general perspective, our hunger signal is going to keep us full for roughly 4 hours. And so we're trying to place our meals in that same time frame. So like 3 meals a day, a couple snacks, because it's more than likely going to keep your energy levels, your blood sugar levels stable. This, of course, has a lot of individualization between people. So like some people just have 2 meals a day or, what have you. So doesn't mean that everyone must have 3 meals and a couple snacks a day, but that's generally a good starting point if you've never really had a great, consistent diet. All right. So what does that look like in terms of like taking that graphic and how energy plays into our diet? How do we transfer that to like, what should it look like on my plate? So this is the my plate. And this is just kind of a guide. So the idea is that in a meal, we're looking for a large degree of our diet to be from carbohydrate because that's our energy source, but it's going to come from various items. So, a quarter of our plate roughly is going to be those carbohydrates that are energy rich. So pasta, bread, rice, potatoes, noodles, things like that. That's going to get kind of your motor running. And then we're going to give it a rich source of carbohydrates that are rich in fiber, vitamins, and minerals. So those are our fruits and vegetables. So that's at 50%. And then stabilizing and drawing it out across that meal are those protein-rich foods, whether they're plant or animal-based. The idea really is for the plate, in terms of how that meal stabilizes you, is really looking at that stable energy. We're really looking to diversify and enhance our gut microbiome, decreasing risk for multiple metabolic diseases, better GI function, things like that. This does not mean that you must eat the plate ratio format, 24/7, 365. It's really about like, hey, okay, more often than not, I know eating like this will really keep me stable in energy levels more often than not. Does that mean I might have pancakes on the weekend for breakfast? Yeah, but that also means that I know then I'll probably be hungry a little bit sooner after pancakes, and I'll probably be looking for a snack. And not to be worried that I'm overeating, but just knowing like, hey, pancakes didn't really have those stabilizing foods, so I'm going to be looking for that food. Or to my pancakes, I'm going to add eggs. So it really lets you kind of adapt and flex how your meals are shaped and how your snacks are shaped. So you know how your day can go. Like oftentimes if I know someone's going to be out for a really long portion of the day and they won't have access to eat, like halfway through their day, I'm like, okay, well, maybe we're going to make a really nice, sturdy breakfast to make sure that I can get you further through that day and not worry about you like lagging halfway through and just like not being able to get out of your own way. And I always want to highlight, of course, thinking about like how diverse that my plate can look. It's so easy for us to frame the my plate in kind of a Western lens of like, what does food look like? It's like brown rice, chicken breast, and broccoli. So these are just some other examples of where food can really look and reflect kind of the cultural diversity that we really want food to have. And then of course, the athlete plate in the middle is just showing like, for a lot of us, a lot of us are more active than others. So that really allows that flexibility in how that plate gets divvied up. These are just some examples of my own food. So just really highlighting like it can really look so different. It doesn't have to be like these beautiful, like exact portions. Like you don't have to measure, you don't have to weigh, you don't have to like get out the ruler, but it's really about like from day to day, how do I feed myself and make sure that I feel really stable? And some of that's also experimenting with your body and how you feed yourself. So it's like, oh, like I'm going to try adding something to my breakfast if I've never really been like a big breakfast eater. Maybe I'm just having a banana and going out the door. Maybe I'm going to try adding something to that to see how it feels. It really has to be like your own experiences because you're your own body's best expert. This, of course, also I think implies and assumes access to food. So I never want to forget that we do have a lot of assumptions about what is nutritionally the best food. Like I think, kale and quinoa and all these things come to mind. But I think that also takes into account that like, oh, do I have access to a car? Do I have access to a grocery store? Do I have enough money to get food? Food is a really easy control point for managing our budget when we're feeling short of it. So, like we're going to pay bills, we're going to pay like more critical things in our mind and try to cut it from food. So the USDA every month comes out with the cost of food. So it's taking into consideration not only what would look like a balanced meal, but also the inflation. And of course, we've all felt that in the last year plus. So the idea is that they also have the thrifty plan, which is even lower, is that at every age group, it's cheaper to live as a family because you can buy in bulk. So if you're still buying in bulk, you'll be a little closer to like a family plan. But each of these amount points, if you're an individual shopping for yourself, you have to add 20%. And so this is really what I always come back to when people really want to eat the healthiest and then cheapest and things like that, is that like, do we actually have enough money in our budget to get that food? I certainly, as when I was doing my internship in New Hampshire and I was on loans, every thought in my mind was like, how do I take less money and how do I cut back on the food? So it's like, okay, can I try to live on $25 a week? No, but like, I'm going to try. And so it's really about that compromise of like not being so hypercritical and so focused on perfection and trying to think of like, where can I give myself a little bit of breathing room? Especially because as you go on the lower cost plans, a lot of that assumption is also like, I'm going to have a lot more time. I'm going to need a lot more time. And so that comes kind of like, this is what I call my food unicorn, is that we all want something quick, like really easy and fast to make. We want it to be cheap and we want it to be nutritionally balanced. And the three of those don't really exist in conjunction with each other. And I think that's really hard to let go of, especially like, I'm obsessed with those like really quick, like overview food cooking videos where it's like this beautiful dish gets made in like a time lapse of like a minute. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking like, oh, well, this recipe takes me at least 30 minutes, let alone the chopping and everything like that. So it's really about like, where do I have the space in my life to do these things? And where do I give myself a little bit of breathing room to say like, it's okay today? Because really it's like, I would love to have really well-balanced meals that are like, miraculously on my table, but like, until I become super rich, like I'm not going to get a personal chef. So I always like bring it to like, what's the cost of food, especially with inflation now? And then like, where do I have priorities, right? Where don't I have the time, or where don't I have the money? Or, like maybe that means I don't like get to have organic eggs. It's really about making those considerations from kind of a global picture for yourself. So what does that mean for food? It really means like, just feed your body something every day. We really complicate it all in terms of trying to seek perfection. And it, like, we'll get into this the second half, but it makes it really difficult to feel like we're doing the right thing if we don't feel like we're following what we see as the rules from society. Hydration. So ideally, just like food, we want to keep you well nourished, well hydrated, kind of 24/7. So that's really kind of the first goal. It's like, hey, what's your hydration status day to day when you're not even in the field? If you have difficulty with that, regardless of if it's in the field or if it's like in your apartment or on campus, sometimes it just like, do you have an alarm that you could set on your phone that's just like one specific ringtone as a reminder? Or just like kind of establishing like, oh, what am I drinking right now? Or am I forgetting to grab my water bottle and bring it with me? Hydration really depends on various factors, but what type of activity you're performing. So are we doing strenuous hiking? Are we doing casual walking? Are we are you exercising? Whatever that is, the intensity level. So like, am I doing like a really fast jaunt through up the mountain Am I like the casual stroll? Like, am I starting and stopping? Am I doing a lot of lifting? Am I doing bending? Anything like that? The duration, is it for a couple hours, the whole day? What's the weather like? So cold weather, hot weather, humid weather, your age. We're actually more vulnerable as we age up to dehydration. We're just not getting those signals as easily, and we don't hold on to water as well in our body. And then, of course, like everyone sweats differently. Some people are like really heavy sweaters, and some people are also saltier sweaters. So I don't know if anyone's noticed, like they have like those little flakes that dry off on your shirt after you like have like a hot, intense day of sweating. Some of us produce more salt and release more salt. So like some people need more of it. So kind of like at the upper end, like if you're hiking in hot, humid, or altitude conditions, so like, I don't know, like the Sahara Desert, you're going to need roughly like a liter of water an hour. So it can get really like intense in terms of how much liquid is needed, but it's really also, like I said, with food, it's going to be kind of a learning curve from each person. So as a general rule of thumb, those short, intense jobs, like high intensity effort, we're looking at roughly 8 to 10 ounces of ideally cool water every 20 minutes, and really looking to have that be in like sips throughout that work versus chugging it. We're more likely to cause nausea. We're more likely to cause more dehydration if we don't do it throughout. And then those long jobs that are intense, we're really looking, plus in the 2-hour plus mark, we're really looking also to include those electrolyte containing beverages. So a sports drink or like the salt sticks and things like that, to really make sure that we're not over hydrating with just water and also replenishing our lost potassium and sodiums. So essentials kind of as a rule of thumb, can you bring like a large brim hat just to keep the sun off of you? Sunscreen, anything to kind of decrease the amount of sweating you could do. And then of course, you know, if you have the opportunity and the ability to pack more water, always try to pack more water, but starting with that minimum, if we're doing like regular field work, looking for those 2 liters per day. If you're out in the field for multiple days and you need to just bring a water filter to try to like replenish your water fill amounts from somewhere else, that's also really important. Signs of dehydration, of course, like you start dry lips, tongue, dizziness, lightheadedness, and then we get kind of into the more dangerous levels of chills, clammy skin. So the goal really is staying hydrated kind of all the time, but then also just bringing water and just reminding yourself to take those sips throughout the day. Electrolytes, of course, for this. You could get really technical and like weigh yourself before and after you leave from field work and see how much water you've lost, because that really gives you a good indication of how much water sweat you're losing, because you're likely not losing weight. So that can be a great indication. Also can show you if you're in the opposite direction, like if you gained weight after being out on the field, you might have actually overhydrated, which can be equally as dangerous, but like more uncommon. But a pound of sweat contains roughly 400 to 700 milligrams of sodium, and then 80 to 100 milligrams of potassium. Most electrolyte drinks are kind of ballparking for that range to replenish. So you can do powders, you can do the pre-mixed, but usually I just say like pack a separate bottle to mix it and make sure that you're going from water to liquid. If you're like, I can't be bothered with 2 bottles, you can always mix it into your 1 bottle and just sip that throughout the day, especially if you're doing a really long, intense day. You can also get it from food. So especially if you know you're going into a field work day that's going to be really hot and sweaty, etc., definitely including these foods in your diet leading up to field work, but also packing some of those is certainly helpful in terms of keeping you replenished for electrolytes. I split this into foods to pack, like assuming it's a 1-day field work, and then foods to pack if it's longer, multiple days. Of course, if we can start with a good breakfast as you head out, like eating it on the road or eating it, at your home before you leave, really looking for something really like sturdy. So like, a bagel breakfast sandwich, egg and cheese, something like that. It could be like, one of my favorites is making like the onigiri, the rice ones stuffed with like a tuna kind of like spicy thing. You could do like, overnight oats. It could be a breakfast burrito that you prep a bunch and freeze and then just nuke and then go out the door. And then packing, of course, like I always love the luxury, like trying to pack something like, what if I'm going hiking? Like there's something just so like rewarding and refreshing about like cold, like fresh, like watery things. So, packing some pre-washed grapes and, vegetables and things like that. So you can get that kind of textural, nice crunch of freshness, and then trying to pack maybe a sandwich in that cooler. Fruit and vegetable squeeze pouches, and really just trying to think like, oh, can I do really like watery things to keep that level up in my system and not just have to rely on the water. We're packing for multiple days. You can also pack any of these for the day of. I love all of these anyway. I broke it down like carbohydrates in terms of providing energy. You can do some fresh fruit. Dried fruit's always a great one because they're not really going to be susceptible as much to like melting like chocolate would. Ready to eat cereals is always a nice thing to snack on, or granola, pretzels, all those salty kind of crackery things, gummy candies, Jolly Ranchers. In terms of those proteins and fats, like the nuts, seeds, trail mix is always a great one just because they're really nutrient dense and calorie dense. So it gives you a lot of energy with like the least amount of packing needed, especially if you're worried about like the amount of space you have available. Any sort of jerky, also really great, rich in salt. And those pre-flavored like canned bean protein pouch kind of things. Like I feel like there's a lot of them have come a far way. Of course, pack your can opener if it doesn't have one of the pop tops. You could do some shelf stable like 8-ounce milk cartons and then add that for the granola cereal. And then of course, MREs, if you really have the budget. I think that becomes more of a block there. All right, so that was like quick and dirty foundations of food, making a big kind of 180 turn from feeding our body foundationally and physically to like, how does that get complicated by society? Of course, starting like with my statement of privilege, I am cisgender, straight-sized, physically able-bodied, and a professional. So just like putting that out there, like that is something to acknowledge and always be aware of and mindful of when I speak about my experiences. It's coming from my lens. Does of course mean that I'm continuously trying to do work and increasing my knowledge base, but that like we live in a toxic world and we're swimming in the sharks. And so it's always about like, we need to grow and acknowledge, but build. So from a nutrition kind of campus health perspective, a lot of my work deals in disordered eating disorders. So that's really a lot of my perspective in how I approach the idea of body expectations. So I like love the idea of like really putting in context. I think society, diet culture has manipulated us, trained us to believe that our weight is an individual choice and decision guided by our physical activity level, like how much we move our body and what we eat and how much we eat. And those are just blips in what determines our weight. And so I think it's so important and critical to remember that there are so many factors, and these are just some of them, that determine how our body chooses to be in space. Dieting history, age, stress, like the amount of sleep you're getting, any sort of medications you're on. So many things influence how your body chooses to feel safe and where that weight tends to lie. I'm not going to read through all of these, so I'll have the slides sent to you guys, but these are just some of those general statistics, unfortunately, about people in marginalized bodies, BIPOC, all of those, and how eating disorders show up. Unfortunately, it shows up pretty strongly, and they're unfortunately not shown up in research. They're less likely to get referrals for higher levels of care. They're less likely to be asked about disordered eating. So there's so many ways that we could do better. And that's really kind of the goal in terms of, I think, momentum in supporting people in kind of outside communities. Is that like how often do I see someone, like, for instance, like a non-white dietitian? So it's really about like, how do we represent and best show up for each other? But those are all for you guys to read through. But going into kind of how we got here. So this is not like a vacuum, like we all grow, like, are born and we just have this idea of like, oh, like eating too much is bad and like larger bodies are bad. There's so much history and kind of learned behavior here. In terms of like a book I could not like more highly recommend is Sabrina String's Fearing the Black Body. It really goes into kind of how race and the triangle slave trade and like this idea and fear of others really pushed and drives a lot of this idea that a certain body is a better body, a white body, a thin body. Religion, of course, plays into this. Like Catholicism really pushes against like gluttony, overindulgence, Protestantism, like, which is very strongly like represented like kind of in our culture in the US, temperance at the table. Class plays a big part, right? It's like class determines how much food and how much money you have to buy food. It determines kind of like what sidewalks you have in your neighborhood. There's research study that shows like your zip code is more related to your BMI than like other like bigger factors that we usually think of. So class plays a huge role. And then of course we compound that culturally. So we oftentimes picture the fat body, the larger body, as the villain or incompetent, loud, lazy, greedy, etc. And that also then gets kind of intersected with women, and then once again through race. And so like, you know, these images that I've pulled, right, these are all childhood images. These are things we grow up with from a very young age. They're very culturally like prevalent. And we absorb those. It's not something you're taught necessarily verbally as like emphatic, like this is this, but it's just like we see these images, we're told these images, and we absorb those thoughts. And we really take those on, right? So that anti-fatness very much becomes like, oh, it's okay if they're fat, but I can't be. Like that would be devastating. And it really continues to pathologize and demonize and really other people who have every right to live in and exist in their bodies that they exist in. Weight stigma is a risk factor for depression, body dysfunction, low self-esteem. Unfortunately, it also increases the frequency for binge eating, so it can really heighten disordered eating and eating disorders. It's also really shown prevalently, unfortunately, in a lot of healthcare providers. Just showing to the image, this is Myrna Valerio. She's like one of my idols. She is an ultra runner. Like, look her up. She's got, you know, videos and documentaries and website and a book, but she is an amazing person and human. And I think it really lets us have those visual representations of bodies existing in places that we stereotypically don't imagine. Like, you know, we work with a lot of people who are like, oh, I exercise because like runners are thin, or like, you know, XYZ will happen. I'm like, no, you move your body because it feels amazing to move your body. Size does not, of course, necessarily equal health. This research study by Hotchkiss and Leyland, they found that the BMI between 25 and 37 had the lowest incidence of early death. So that like hazard ratio on the Y, like we always assume, right? Because like normal weight, like so many people are like, oh, like if I looked up at the BMI, it said that I'm overweight, or it said like I need to be at XYZ weight. Completely arbitrary. One of the best podcasts to listen to about the science of it is Unpacking Weight Science. I have it later in the slides, but it really goes into kind of like the nitty gritty about how like the BMI was created and how really arbitrary it is. But we've gotten so institutionalized, and so we just take it for granted that that is an indicator and a metric of our health. And then the Gastro-Engadi study, most cardiometabolic markers, so that's like lipids and, you know, like insulin, are improved with physical activity independent of weight loss, which I think is so critical. Like you do not have to lose weight for your health to be like, you know, to improve quality of health. So this brings us kind of to this idea that I work a lot in my office with, is that for whatever reason, more often people are like, well, I'm supposed to be a lower weight, or I've gained weight, or I'm doing it for my health, that we start this kind of like, oh, I'm going to cut calories, I'm going to exercise more, I'm going to take XYZ food out of my diet. We have this restriction. Our bodies are not, our body's primary goal in life is survival, right? Our body wants to live. And so when we engage in restriction, what our body fears is like something really bad out there, famine, war, like winter, whatever out there, something bad is happening. And like, I need to change our body, our biology, to make sure that I survive. And so what's going to happen is your body is going to increase lots of food. It's going to increase hunger signals. It's going to tunnel vision about food. So like hyper thoughts about food. in order to get you as a human to go seek food out and eat more to fix this gap. So that's like the restrict, the overeating. And then unfortunately, because of, diet culture, we're like, oh my goodness, like I'm a failure. I have no willpower. Like I am, why couldn't I do this? And so we put the guilt and shame on ourselves that like, I am the failure. I did not succeed. And so then we're like, okay, come Monday, I'm going to do this new diet, or I'm going to try this new thing, or it's going to be different. Like so much of diet culture has taught us that it is an individual choice to fail or succeed, versus biologically, our bodies are designed to survive. And so it's going to do all these things in terms of changing your mental and physical health to try to keep you alive and try to keep you just to think about food and seek food. Also not going to write this slide down, but this is really interesting. Kind of like they kind of collated all the studies that show what happens when we engage in a lot of yo-yo dieting. So like weight changes, the shift in weight up and down. Like, yes, we can all lose weight. You just cut calories and your weight's going to drop. Yes, because your body's in a sudden rapid change. But scientifically, biologically, our body wants to put that weight back on because it feels safe. It doesn't want the deficit because that leads to what it feels is going to be starvation and death. And so these are all the studies that show all of those kind of negative impacts, really, of when we have these ups and downs in our weight. It's really stressful for our system, is kind of like the end story. So what does that mean in terms of like, how do we take care of our bodies in a better way, right? So what we have is health at every size, HAES. And the goal really is that diets don't work. The research shows diets don't work. If we're not engaging in actual eating disorders, that weight loss is not sustainable. So the idea is, how do we shift the ideas of how we take care of ourselves? And so it's the idea that really respecting the body in every form it takes, and really thinking about, how do I choose to feed myself, move my body, take care of myself, that doesn't take weight as the end all be all metric of success. I think it also like really important that they've kind of updated this as we go. It's really trying to take into into it is that like food looks different for different people. Movement looks different for different people at different ages, different cultures, etc. So really just going across the spectrum of all people and making sure it reflects true to yourself. That also then comes to like body positivity, body neutrality. So body positivity is a self-acceptance, inner worth, and appreciation for our body's abilities. The idea really is to challenge and break down diet culture. Controversies here. Unfortunately, body positivity in a large way has been co-opted by kind of like the mainstream. And so sometimes we don't feel very welcomed by that category. So oftentimes I then offer body neutrality. Like maybe we're not at the point where like, yeah, my body's amazing, like rainbows and butterflies. So then it's like, okay, maybe we can start at or live in body neutrality. And so it's really like, okay, how do I honor and respect my body in all the things it can do without expectations or needing to like love it? So that's kind of what the phrases on the right side is really about like, how do we remind ourselves the multitude of ways that our body exists and helps us do the things we want to do. I want to make sure I'm leaving time for questions. Okay. So like, how do we put this into practice? Really, it's like, okay, how do I nourish my whole self, mentally and physically, right? So when we come to like the physical part, the foundational nutrition stuff that I talked about at the beginning, but then the emotional context, right? Like food tastes amazing for a reason. Like it's supposed to nourish us, but it's also like, okay, we, celebrate through food. So many cultures, like I'm thinking like we're coming up into the Lunar New Year and I'm, going home. Like I'm thinking like, oh, like we're going to make dumplings together and we're going to have like my rice cake soup and all these things, right? Like there's so much emotion, history, culture connected into food that is completely separate and independent of like the physical purposes of eating. and they're both equally essential. And so it's really about like, where do the two come together for me, right? It's like, where can I make it all work? And that's definitely, I think, like a lifelong challenge that we live in, because yeah, we live in like kind of the toxic diet culture. So maybe it's starting at like, okay, well, the first thing I'm going to do is like, I am going to, bring back, a childhood favorite food, or I'm going to unfollow someone on social media that just promotes a lot of that diet culture, or who I feel like I body compare to. And then also like that second sentence is really about shifting perspective and going more into that health at every size. Is like, I think most of the time I pull this into from a physical activity perspective, is that exercise feels very dogmatic and prescriptive and regimented. And like, there's a feeling, there's a stereotype. It's like, I need to be sweating, I need to be tired, I need it to be in the gym, I need to do like, 30 minutes. And that doesn't really have a lot of intrinsic or instinctual kind of feel to it. So it's really about like, okay, how do I change that perspective about movement, exercise, into a way that feels more reasonable, more logical to my life? So like, for instance, like, oh, okay, I have to do a lot of field work. Well, what does that require of me, right? Like, I'm going to have to be outside a lot. I'm bending. I have to like lift things, move things, right? There's a certain degree of physical strength that is required of my job, of my career. And I want to make sure that I don't injure my back, or that I can get through the day and like, do my part. So maybe that's like where you interject into movement, right? Okay, it's like, oh, I need to strengthen my legs. I need to make sure I strengthen my lower back. I'm doing it so that I can be a stronger person on the field. It really helps change the perspective of like, my body is problematic. My body needs to be fixed. My body should not be this way, to like, how do I encourage this body to do the things I want it to do? And then of course, always like, what resources do I have available to me right now, right? Like being a student, especially like a grad student at NCSU, if you're like in that situation, like, I think it's always like housing costs, like, like student fees, all those things become more of a player in like, oh yeah, I'm going to spend 2 hours boiling beans. So it's really about like, where am I now? It doesn't mean that you have to be in that same situation 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? It's always about checking in about your current situation and trying to meet that need in the moment. Some of these I already mentioned, but this is just some of my favorite podcasts and books to learn more about diet culture, kind of building up your kind of anti-fat brain, and trying to pull away from kind of the wellness diety kind of world. So love all of these. But yes, I rushed through that to get to some questions. So I wanted to make sure I left some time for that. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that awesome presentation. I definitely just learned that I need to be drinking water throughout my field day instead of chugging it all at the end. So that's a note to self. Okay, let me look at some of these Q&As. Someone asks, are there any long-term effects of dehydration past what you may experience that day or week? This person thinks they're consistently dehydrated during the field season, but hoping to do better this year. So just curious to see if that can cause issues down the road.
I don't know about like real permanent damage, but I do know you'll have that lingering fatigue, sometimes nausea, if in the days or the like hours that you get back from field work. Just because your body doesn't have, like, when we have enough water in our system, because really water is trying to move electrolytes to your muscles to get them to move and to contract and relax. So you're gonna feel kind of like, I don't know, like a limp noodle. It's probably like my best analogy, but yeah, it's definitely gonna feel like recovery, fatigue, all those things are gonna just drag on you. but I don't know per se if there's like a long-term, like 5 years, 10 years from now, you're going to have some sort of impact, but you'll certainly feel it in the kind of the days post field work.
Awesome, thank you. Another person asks, what is the difference between disordered eating and an eating disorder?
Mostly just the diagnostic criteria. So an eating disorder is diagnosed by a doctor, or usually like a therapist. And that is a very specific from the DSM criteria list. So you would have to reach certain criteria in order to kind of represent. So oftentimes it's like engaging in it for the last 3 to 6 months at least. It's happening X number of times. It's like seeing like X number of weight loss, which doesn't necessarily have to happen, but there's a very specific criteria that needs to be met for that diagnostic criteria. Unfortunately, that leaves everyone else in kind of the disordered world. So what I usually compare it to is that like on like a spectrum, there's like instinctive eaters. So like people who are like, they eat when they're hungry, they stop when they're full, they don't think about it all the time, their body is not like their main focus. That's an instinctive eater. I would say there's very few of those people, but like really happy when I meet them because I always want to know how it happened. And then on the other side, of course, is like a true like diagnosed eating disorder. And then disordered eating is basically everything in between. And so many people don't necessarily reach their like sub-threshold eating disorder. So yes, very concerning. We work with a lot of those people, like just as concerning, because oftentimes, especially in marginalized groups, like success and transition into proper care is so low. It's such an easy tipping point to get to a full-blown eating disorder. So like, that's really the scary part, is that oftentimes also that people don't think they're sick enough, that they're like, oh, no, like I've seen sicker, or like, I'm not thin enough, or I'm not like, I can still get through my class, I'm still passing. There's so many ways that we out sick ourselves and think that it's not that bad, like I'm still managing, but like it's because we've lived it our whole lives. We've really become kind of immune, like not immune, but like kind of desensitized to how severe it becomes.
Awesome, thank you for that. Another question is, are there any important self-care tips for after a day in the field? Specific ways to like rest or take care of ourselves.
Yeah, I would definitely say if you've been on your feet all day, it's definitely putting a lot of pressure, and the blood flow is like hitting your feet over and over again. So similar to like someone who's doing like a marathon or anything like that, I oftentimes tell people like try to elevate your feet up in the evening time to really let that blood come back up your body, and so that swelling doesn't feel so prevalent. Definitely in terms of hydration, this is sometimes a good indicator. Like if you're coming home or like you're finishing field work and you are, like you said, chugging or guzzling your water, it's likely an indication that you haven't drunk enough water during the day, because you're trying to like fill the whole gap in one go. So it's definitely like keep the hydration during the day, but then when you come home, continue to have those high hydration foods. And then maybe also like if it's more like cooler weather, maybe like a soup that's a little bit saltier, or like if it's summertime, maybe going for like a sandwich with some like cheese or deli meat or something that's a little bit saltier to get all those needs met again. But really just elevate the feet is always a really nice feeling to like get that pressure off.
Foot elevation does feel super nice. I've tried to do that. And I think we have time for one final question. This person says, I struggle to remember to snack and drink in the field since I get so wrapped up in my work. Me too. Do you have any recommendations on ways to remind myself besides being more in tune with my body?
In a perfect world, we'd all be able to listen to our bodies and know what it's asking for. And most of us, unfortunately, because of diet culture and as well-meaning as our parents and guardians and people in our world, we often get trained out of that. Like we're like, finish your plate, you can't eat dessert until you eat your vegetables, or like dinner time's now, like you can't leave the table until you finish. So it really like misfires a lot of those. So like I think being in tune to our hunger is kind of like a unicorn, right? Like I want everyone to get there, but probably not right now. So it's usually like just set that timer, or like if you know that you're not someone who remembers to do it, it's like, oh, like, can I keep like I don't know, like safety pin, like the gummy snacks or whatever, like on your shirt or your jacket or whatever you're wearing, as like a annoying reminder of like eat. Because it's really like a lot of people are like out of sight, out of mind. They get really focused in their work and they forget that anything else exists and that time is going by. So if I can make it any more awkward, or like a reminder that every time you like move your hand, you're like scratching that, you know, package or whatever, it helps to kind of be like, oh, wait, there's a reason why that's there. I'm supposed to take a break. So that might be that reminder just enough to be like, okay, it's really important. I'm going to be like more energized. I'm going to feel better if I take that quick break and feed myself again.
Thank you so much. Well, we are just about at time. So we want to thank you again, Sue, for joining us today and sharing your expertise. We hope that we can continue doing this work when it comes to educating others and challenging stereotypes and taking care of ourselves in the field. I would also like to thank our Field Inclusive intern behind the scenes, Kayla. Thank you for managing our Zoom webinar today. Again, for those who have joined us today, we will continue these conversations. We will also have this information posted to our YouTube channel, and we will have the slides with Sue's permission to like post somewhere on our website as well. Please be sure to follow and interact with us on all of our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at Field Inclusive, and please be sure to visit our website to learn more about our organization. Tomorrow's event at 4 p.m. ET, we have Dr. Kelsey Byers, plant biologist and DEI advocate, who will discuss disabilities in the field, navigating nature and academia as a disabled scientist. And with that, thank you everyone for attending. We hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for joining us. Bye.